J'invite notre collègue, donc Regine Pruzsinszky, professeure à l'université de Freiburg, qui va nous parler de Tigunanum from Zimri-Lim to Hattusili I.
Dear colleagues, dear ladies and gentlemen, I'm very honored to have been invited to this conference, this highly interesting conference by Dominique Charpin and his colleagues, to present a paper on Tigunanum, a place in Upper Mesopotamia that has kept me quite busy for the past few years, quite unexpectedly so, as I had the opportunity to work on unpublished texts coming from that region. During the Old Babylonian period, Tigunanum was referred to as Mat Tigunanim. Texts from Mari, Tel Shemshara, Tel Elan, which deal with the Turukians, suggest that Tigunanum was located somewhere north of Shubat Enlil, beyond the Tur Abdin, on the left bank of the Tigris. It was towards the end of Zimri-Lim's reign that the king of Tigunanum was mentioned in a list of expenditures signed by Mukanishum. According to this list, the throne made out of precious Musukanum wood was given as a reward to a king named Nakat Mish, king of Tigunanum, as a reward for joining a coalition with Zimri-Lim against Ashlaka. Another letter by Zimri-Lim reveals that Tigunanum had already been a vassal of Mari during Ḥattun-Lim's reign. Following Zimri-Lim's information on Tigunanum, everything ceased, as did also other sources, which is why this period is referred to as the Dark Age. In Upper Mesopotamia, this Dark Age between the Old and Middle Babylonian period started with the end of the archives of Tel el-Rimach and Tel Elan during the reign of Samsi-Addu and lasted until the rise of the Mittani and Kassite kingdoms. And during this Dark Age, another king of Tigunanum emerges, and that is Tunip-Teššup, who is also known as Tunia, who is addressed in the Labarna letter by a king named Labarna. That's why it has this name. And this text was edited by Mirjo Salvini in 1994. Labarna, who is usually identified with Hattusili I, takes us well into the 17th century, for which there is more textual evidence actually coming from Tigunanum, now referred to as Tigunani. It is the first letter that is linked actually to Hattusili I, providing vital contemporary proof of the historicity of elements in Hittite legend and history, in particular to his campaigns. Hattusili's second campaign was directed against the Syrian strongholds, where he destroyed Hashum in the area of Gaziantep, an important ally of Halab, and then he moved on to Chachum and destroyed it as well. All this may be connected also to Tigunani's support of the Hittites, because according to his annals, Hattusili I received a silver chariot as a gift from the king of Tikunaya, or Tikuna, but it remains unknown whether Tigunani was a vassal or an independent ally, and whether the Hittites ultimately conquered Tigunani as well. Apart from the Labarna letter, which with this essential synchronism, of course, more texts can be related to Tunip-Teššup, which most likely come from the site itself. Salvini published the Ḥabiru prism along with two divinatory texts in the 90s, and more recently another prism called Il Prisma della Città, and a number of interesting administrative documents. Andrew George edited another set of important texts coming from Tigunani, including divinatory texts clearly belonging to the Aleppo and the Babylonian tradition, as well as documents and letters demonstrating strong ties with Assyria. In total, about 450 tablets can be linked to Tigunani based on their content, the language, the prosopography, and for those that have been actually published, their paleography. Most of these texts are only known through the notebooks, or the so-called folios of texts that were collated and transliterated by Wilfred Lambert in the late 80s, early 90s. However, some of the texts that have been published in the meantime do not appear in those folios. Of the 445 known texts, only 25 have actually been edited, and the majority of the texts remain unpublished, and they are scattered across various private collections. Unfortunately, the original tablets cannot be collated to ensure a proper publication or reconstruction of their archaeological context, which was never recorded and will thus be forever lost. Nevertheless, the project on the Kingdom of Tigunani, based on unpublished texts in the folios, and which was led by Josué Justel, has enabled the project team to gain insight into the history, the administration, and the society of Upper Mesopotamia during the 17th century. In 2021, Juan Antonio Belmonte, one of the team members, provided a compelling analysis of the geopolitical context of the Tigunani records. He demonstrated that the heartland of this kingdom, comprising at least 85 towns and settlements centered around the Tur Abdin, and Belmonte's reconstruction is supported by Il Prisma della Città, which recorded levies or tribute in the form of silver bundles and rings paid by various cities to the King Tunip-Teššup. The core of the kingdom must have been situated somewhere along the Upper Tigris, within the region of Diyarbakir, Bismil, and Batman, and strong ties with Amasha, probably Amas, with the place Hurra, which is close to Urkesh, and Kawilishtamani, which is probably identical with Old Babylonian Kawila, demonstrate that Tigunani's area of control extended southwards of the Tur Abdin, which provided access to the Ḥabiru region via the Mardim Pass. And thanks to its strategic location, Tigunani controlled most of the older trading routes leading from Ashur to Kanish via Amor Sakum, Eluchut, and Har Mensheni, which is the Old Babylonian Hirbazanum. Traditionally, the Labarna letter has been understood as a Hittite king informing his servant or vassal Tunip-Teššup of a plan to attack Ḥachum with the assistance of Tigunani soldiers in exchange for a share of the booty. This reading was recently challenged by Freidank and Prechl, according to whom no military action is actually mentioned in the letter. Instead, the Hittite king informed Tunia of his plan, of his kaskal in the sense of Padanu or Laktu, to form a coalition against Ḥachum by proposing that Tunia enters into a contractual agreement with the Ḥachean. In fact, recently published documents from Tigunani reflect quite close and peaceful relations between Tigunani, Hatti, and Ḥachum before Hattusili I's campaign against Ḥachum, and that Tigunani and the Hittites were perhaps contemplating an alliance of convenience with benefits for both sides. For example, this document shown on the left-hand side, which was published by Salvini in 2021, records the transfer of silver from Hatti to Tigunani for onward distribution. The text in the middle reports that a man from Hatti had sent copper as a royal gift to the king of Tigunani, and interestingly, this man from Hatti is named Buli, who may have been the same person as the Hittite king's servant attested in the Labarna letter. Ḥachum is also mentioned in relation with 5 women who are understood to have been seized as booty or prisoners after Hattusili I's conquest of the city. But as this interpretation relies heavily on scarce and incoherent Hittite sources, this interpretation remains doubtful. According to Tigunani texts, we can see that the kingdom maintained quite friendly relations with Ḥachum, which was ruled by a king named Musha, who may have been Ḥattušili I's opponent. King Musha of Ḥachum received textiles and precious metals, and even the queen of Ḥachaya received gifts from the king of Tigunani. Since the texts from Tigunani do not reveal any hostility between Ḥachum, Ḥatti, and Tigunani, the tentative interpretation of Tikuna's gift to Ḥattušili as a celebration of the success against the common enemy Ḥachum still needs further evidence. Tigunani was rather threatened by the Kassites, who had presumably reached the upper Tigris following the Piedmont route alongside the Zagros and Taurus ranges. An administrative record refers to a Kassite invasion of the land belonging to the city of Tigunani, which is why hundreds or even thousands of bows and arrows were distributed among individuals from various towns of the kingdom. Among the recipients, we can detect soldiers known from the Ḥabiru prism. The first recipient is, for instance, Tunip-Teššup from a place called Indayatsi, which is located in the Ḥabur triangle close to Nahur, who is followed by an individual named Shakumshe, who is attested again as Shukumshe in the prism from Shinitsa, and another individual, Suka from Achumetsa, according to the reading of Salvini, which is most probably misspelled for Armetsa, which is frequently attested in the Tigunani texts. In an unpublished letter to the king Tunip-Teššup, Adirum, a vassal of Tunip-Teššup from the Apum region, reported that the Kassites have invaded the land of Tigunani and that they are now coming up to his city Urpan to do battle. Adirum requests that chariots and Ḥabiru troops to be quickly sent to protect Urpan, which is located outside of Tigunani's realm, somewhere to the southwest or south of Telelan. Urpan used to be part of the kingdom of Apum in the eastern Ḥabur triangle and was now ruled by a king named Kuzi. And in another letter, Adirum, who appears to have been under particular threat, informed his father and lord Tunip-Teššup that he was facing increased pressure coming from the land of the king of Ilanzura, assuring him that I will be the enemy of your enemies and the ally of your allies. In another letter, dealing with merchandise, escaped servants, women under the protection of Ishtar and Belet Apim, Adirum addressed another attested king of Tigunani, and possibly also Tunip-Teššup's successor, who's named Nakadmish, and we will call him Nakadmish II. He addresses him as his brother, which indicates that he was on equal footing with Nakadmish. Following Tigunani and Ḥachum, the third most frequently cited toponym in the Tigunani texts is Biushnum, which is undoubtedly identical to the old Babylonian Bush-Anum. Located south-southwest of the Tur Abdin, the town was actively involved in horse trade and ruled by a king named Paiter, who received oxides and cloaks from Tigunani. Once shoes and textiles were delivered to the palace of Biushnum, and the messenger Zimri-Lim, who is very likely attested in another document as the king's messenger receiving a cloak and oxide. In a letter published by Andrew George in Kusas 34, the Assyrian ruler Pilach-Shadu, who is still read as Pilach-Dagan here, asked Tunip-Teššup to grant his servant Beil-Shanu safe conduct to the city of Biushnai, which attests to particularly good relations among the players along this trade route, and also the persistence of Assyrian mercantile activity after the end of the old Assyrian archives. Pilach-Shadu, who was a ruler of Assur and is referred to as a brother, that is an equal of Tunip-Teššup, and also, although he does not figure in the Assyrian king list, he certainly was a petty potentate like so many others in Upper Mesopotamia at this time. And his letter contains a reference to the crime in the city of Ashur, a punitive measure which is otherwise unattested. It reads, concerning Nehemiah, who is my servant who transgressed against the city of Ashur, Nehemiah has been handed over to your lands, and he's not the son of the god Ashur. And apart from that, the letter deals with the commercial activities with the Karum Shimala, which is located in the great western bend of the Euphrates, presumably southeast of Ḥachum. The reverse of the partially preserved text with the siglum WGL 7968, which contains a list of individuals with a reference to the flooding of the harvest of the land, inserts a very brief chronicle that mentions Tunip-Teššup in connection with perhaps Hachum, it's only Ha that is preserved here, and with Pilach-Shadu, son of Bazaya from Buruli. Burulum is located in the Upper Tigris region to the northeast of the Chabur Triangle on one of the old Assyrian caravan routes, and while the name of the king of Mardaman, modern-day Bazetki, is lost, this document may still provide crucial chronological evidence. Pilach-Shadu, named here with his father Bazaya, was also the sender of a letter to Tunip-Teššup, I just mentioned before, and Bazaya was the 52nd king in a part of the Assyrian king list, which actually covers this dark age that ultimately started with the death of Samsi-Addu and the unstable reign of his son Ishme-Dagan, who is the 40th king in the Assyrian king list. Now, if Pilach-Shadu, attested in the Tigunani text, was indeed also a son of Bazaya of the Assyrian king list, this could provide an important chronological anchor for the period of Assyrian history that actually plunged into this dark age. The total number of years passing between the death of Samsi-Addu and Bazaya and his sons, that is 145 years, suggests that the middle and also the reduced middle chronology may not be as far off as it was postulated about 30 years ago when the new chronology gained momentum. And we would reach a middle chronology dating for Hattusili I around 1631, according to the numbers of the Assyrian king list. And even if the Assyrian king lists, of course, are not fully reliable, it seems that the texts were continuously produced in Assur during this dark age. The Tigunani texts have attracted further attention regarding their dating conventions, of which I will only briefly touch upon the peculiar use of the Limu system. We have 15 eponyms that are known from the Tigunani texts. 5 of these occur in pairs, which is very unusual. Most of the eponymic years are linked to King Tunip-Teššup, either by direct reference or indirectly via an individual called Enana, who's in charge of the textile workshop at the palace, or the scribes of the documents, who are listed in the blue column on the right-hand side of the table. Although we cannot establish a relative chronology for the eponyms, they span at least 10 years of Tunip-Teššup's reign, and interestingly, the names of the Limu Inaya, Shu-Ishtar, as well as Ashur-Idin are attested much earlier in the revised eponym list, of which Shu-Ishtar and Ashur-Idin appear in Tigunani as single eponymates. This may indicate that these and other single eponymates represent the so-called official Limu, probably appointed by the city-state of Assur and closely associated with the traditional system. This eponym system seems to have been supplemented to meet the local needs, as evidenced by the paired eponymates, the local eponyms, I would call them. The local eponyms include Hurrian names, some of which one can also find on the Ḥabiru prisms, such as Echlip Keshiar, Tsea, and Aripurani, and as each of these only occur once in the Ḥabiru prism, their identification is likely. All 3 appear in the second position after a Limu with an Akkadian name. A look at the contents of the dated text reveals a clear pattern of distribution. Documents dealing with agriculture and animal husbandry, marked in yellow in the table, generally have 2 eponyms in the Limu dating, and in contrast, texts dated only with 1 Limu contain information about finished products such as clothing, oxides, bows and arrows, silver, wool, and various items of equipment that are marked in green in this table. The latter are, of course, closely associated with the palace of Tigunani and are therefore likely to exhibit the traditional Limu system, dating system. And closely associated with the palace are also the divinatory texts, which Shamash Moshtesher explicitly wrote in the palace of Tunip-Teššup, which always display one eponym only. The paired eponyms seem to represent two different entities, the palace and the local or regional and the local or regional administration. And at the same time, it represents also a continuation of the system of the Old Assyrian period, when some of the limu were identified with specific functionaries or even ministers of the city. And the persistence of this Assyrian or traditional eponym system and the Upper Mesopotamian calendar during the late 17th century is likely due to the intensive trade relations that necessitated a standardized and super-regional system. The information gathered on Tigunani and its environs in Upper Mesopotamia reflects a politically fragmented state of Amorite and Hurrian polities that only merged into the Mittanian hegemony in the late 16th or even early 15th century. Tigunani was a medium-sized Hurrian kingdom controlling the Upper Tigris region southwards beyond the Turabin, and it was just one of many principalities in Upper Mesopotamia, because we have more than 20 petty rulers that are attested to have controlled small territories dominated by urban centers. Although they acted largely autonomously, many sought alliances with Tunip-Teššup for security or commercial reasons. Tigunani seems not to have been dependent on any larger entity, and the newly acquired information provides us with a quite unique view of the situation on the Upper Tigris, attesting to a continuity of political structures with numerous small principalities or city-states with a very strong communal power, represented by the elders, the shugi, and the local limu, who mediated between the palace and the local collective governance or community leadership. I was able to identify a number of Ḥabiru, of the Ḥabiru prism in the text of the folios, and apart from being asked to protect towns in a military context, some of them acted as responsible or witnessing elders who were in close contact with shepherds in the context of animal husbandry in towns of the kingdom of Tigunani, which was, of course, one of the key elements of the pastoral economy and society in this region under palatial control. And the Ḥabiru are also involved in the offering of animals to Nergal, perhaps to celebrate a victory or mark an alliance. And they also received gifts from Tunip-Teššup, possibly as a reward for their loyalty. The Ḥabiru prism with reference to the king, the two eponyms, and the Ḥabiru, some of which can be actually identified with the elders, the eponyms, and perhaps also even with petty rulers, appears to have been a written medium that in a way visualized the governmental and administrative structure of the Tigunani kingdom with a very centralized palace administration. And although the archaeological context of this prism and il prisma della città is unknown, they both name King Tunip-Teššup and given also their official character, most probably originate from a palatial context. In terms of their content, namely the Ḥabiru in the service of the King Tunip-Teššup and the towns and villages subject to levies, the prisms may have served as prestige objects of cultural significance to the formation of the Tigunani kingdom's identity, while also, of course, fulfilling their administrative function. Evidence from Tigunani shows that the term Dark Age is no longer appropriate for this period around 1600. Instead, the term transitional period or transition period, as used by Shigeo Yamada, in relation to Assyria between the 17th and 15th centuries is certainly more appropriate, for which Tigunani texts provide an important testimony as a region that was fully integrated in the traditional and interregional networks. I thank you for your attention.